Okay, it's a great thrill to introduce John Stapleton. John's increasingly these days, and has been for much of his career, he has been quoted in the media, so we're very lucky to have him today. John had a long and kind of excellent career in Ontario Public Service. He's formed a authoritative nonprofit called Open Policy, and many turn to John and his team and colleagues for advice on how to deal with matters of poverty and income and so on. He's recently, not recently, for many years now, I guess, had a very well-received seminar series lecture, I guess, on retiring on a low income, and talked across Toronto and the libraries on that. And I know John's gets hundreds of calls now. He's very tuned into North Scarborough and other statistics. And so he knows what's going on in the communities that we're most interested in. He is also on the Scarborough Community Renewal Board. We awarded him a Paul Harris Award a number of years ago from our club. So he's a Paul Harris Award recipient. And I know there's lots more, John, I can say about you, but as an aside, I know you've had an interest in horse racing and the horse racing industry over the years as well. So a little bit of a color commentary. But John, I know you're really busy. You're constantly on calls because of your expertise, and we're just thrilled to have you talk to us today. So, and if at any time, you're called off during our work, we would understand, but because we know your time is very valuable, but the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks very much. And again, thanks very much for this opportunity. I've lived in the East End of Toronto all my life. In the last 42 years, I've been a homeowner in northern Scarborough in the great neighborhood of Milliken. And what I'd like to do today is just tell you a little bit about our poverty statistics as they compare to the rest of the Toronto Census Metropolitan Area, which is almost consistent with the GTA, but not quite. And then I'm just going to introduce three concepts that I've been using since the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak and crisis, and just relate those a bit to the District of Scarborough. So I'd like to start out with some statistics, and I'm talking first about poverty in Scarborough, and I'm not going to talk about child poverty or seniors poverty just now. I'm going to talk about adult poverty between ages 18 to 65, which is what we generally think of as the main part of our workforce. And I can tell you that for the Toronto as a whole, as a census metropolitan area, that our level of working poverty is 7%. But when we compare that to Scarborough, Scarborough is over 10% people of our workforce who are working poor. So 7 and 10. When we look at people who are not working, but who are also poor, if we look over the whole of the CMA, Census Metropolitan Area, again, very close to the GTA, the level of people who are not working, but are also poor is 8%. In Scarborough, that is 13%. And in that 13%, 10.6 percentage points of that, so the majority of it, are people who are receiving two programs, one called Ontario Works, which will be known to most of you as welfare, and actually a higher amount within that 10.6 who are on a program called Disability Supports, otherwise known as Ontario Disability Support Program. So The non-working poor for the whole of the census metropolitan area of Toronto is 8%, but it's 13% in Scarborough. Then when we look at people who are not poor, we have 11% of the census metropolitan area of people who are not poor, but they are also not working. And in Scarborough, it's very similar, but also higher, where people who are not working and who are not poor are 12%. So what that leaves left over for the whole of the census metropolitan area is that 74% of all 18 to 65-year-olds are in the workforce and not poor. When we compare that to Scarborough, we're at 65%. So it's 9 percentage points different. So our labor force is lower amongst people who are 18 to 65 by 9 full percentage points. And that makes us, along with parts of North Rexdale, as the two poorest parts of the census metropolitan area. And so that's what it looks like as we start to go in, and I'll provide these statistics later to Barry and to Dave so that they can get them to you. And this all comes from the 2016 census, so we'll be able to update that fairly soon. But of course, the people I'm going to want to talk about most are that 10% who are working poor and the 13% who are also poor but not working. And start thinking of what that means when we start to look at the COVID crisis, which is going to cause a lot of unemployment. It's going to cause a lot, and it's already happened, of course, a lot of displacement. Fewer people who are going to be working certainly have lost their jobs during that period. And it's going to mean that that people are staying at home. So when we start to look at the array of interventions that are largely, that are being undertaken by government, it's going to be important for us, I think, and what I have started to do is to advocate for Scarborough in this context. And that is because if we don't keep up with what the federal government is doing, and we don't keep up with what the province and the municipalities are doing, we could have a deleterious effect in terms of how those programs are treated on the ground. So in other words, the federal government announces something, especially, let me use the example of the CERB, which is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and say, okay, it has all these rules. You have to have at least $5,000. You can't make more than $1,000. You can't expect to work within the next 14 days. And you would say to yourself, okay, I think most people would be of the view that if Scarborough is a bit poorer than the rest of Toronto, that a lot of these income security programs are going to be more generous in a place like Scarborough that has increased poverty. What I've started to see is the opposite is true. And unless we have particular things that go on and particular ways that these benefits are treated by other government, because remember, one government can give something and another level of government taking it away. So let me introduce just 3 concepts for this talk. And that is, the first is that as we start staying home, some of us are going to have what I might call an isolation dividend. And the isolation dividend occurs when your income stays the same, but the amount of your expenses go down. I am in the isolation dividend group. I had a holiday all set up that didn't happen, and I got a full refund of my, thanks to the Prime Minister announcing it, that I should not go the day before I got all my money back. I put gas in my car a month ago, and it's still half full. That's unheard of. I had a 407 bill of $5.13 when it's normally over $100. So I have an isolation dividend because my income stayed the same, but my expenses have gone up. On the other hand, what you see, generally speaking, with poorer people and the working poor who have lost their jobs is an isolation deficit. And the isolation deficit for the working poor, of course, occurs when they start to lose their jobs and they don't have as much. And the $8,000 that's come through the CERB is not going to be enough to handle their displacement. For those who are not working, people who are on Ontario Works, welfare, and people who are on fixed income from disability programs, these are people who normally went out to food banks and collected food hampers. These are people who went to meals programs. These are people who went to drop-ins and community hubs and that sort of thing, where they receive tokens, they receive various different sorts of supports, they receive meals. All of a sudden they're staying home, and especially for the disabled, it's no laughing matter because many of them are immune compromised and they really got to stay at home. If they catch this thing, they're going to be in real trouble, as opposed to the rest of us who might not be immune compromised. So they have to take it very seriously. And those are the people who are receiving programs like ODSP and have these immune compromises. So they're experiencing an isolation deficit because their income stays the same or goes down, but also they can't get out or shouldn't go out to get the things that they would normally get that would save them a bit of money. And now they're ordering online for their food and their groceries and that sort of thing, where there can be a 30% increment right there. So when you come to that isolation deficit or dividend, you're going to find that more people in Scarborough are going to have an isolation deficit versus the isolation dividend. And so we are going to, so the people in Scarborough who are experiencing poverty, that's the 10% working poor and the 13% non-working poor, we got 24% of Scarborough that is going to be possibly in an isolation deficit, whereas the rest of the CMA, including Scarborough, is at about 15%. So that's an important, there's an 8 percentage point difference there, and that's going to be really important. So that's the first, so we need to, when we get those various programs that the government comes out with, we're going to be more reliant on those programs in the first place. So my second of three concepts in terms of eligibility for these various programs, and I'll use the CERB, the CERB, as an example, and I'll also use the federal senior supplement, the guaranteed income supplement, as another example, is that what you see the Prime Minister say and the Minister say on TV is something I call upfront eligibility for a program. You get the rules, how you receive it. The problem is that there is a back-end eligibility issue, and that is that these programs, especially the CERB and the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors, could be clawed back by governments. And what we saw with Minister Smith in the Ford government last week is that he made a very significant gesture in providing earnings exemptions and treating the CERB as if it was earnings. Bottom line, what that does is that allows someone who's receiving social assistance or disability to keep $1,100 of the $2,000. I feared that they were going to claw back the whole of the $2,000, which would have been bad news for Scarborough because we have more poverty in Scarborough and more of those recipients. And it's not just those recipients. You got to think it's local businesses. If somebody's not getting the $2,000, then that's $2,000 that is not being spent on a Scarborough business, $2,000 not being spent on food, services, supplies, other things. So it's important. The Ford government has allowed people to keep, who are on these programs, to keep $1,100 of the $2,000. And that's not true in all provinces. I can tell you right now that the government of Nova Scotia just yesterday made the policy decision to take back the full of the $2,000, and the government of Newfoundland and Labrador took back the full $2,000 from people who are poor. So it's not something that's just in theory. The government of Saskatchewan also did the same thing. So the provinces that are like Ontario are Alberta and Manitoba, who also have treated it like earnings. And BC government, being an NDP government, I guess they exempted all of it and they let everybody keep all of it. So they're in a small group that includes the Yukon. So on the guaranteed income supplement, bad news, we don't have a decision yet from the federal government as to whether it's going to claw back the CERB. Now, these are the people who are our Walmart greeters. You see them in home hardware, the people who are over 65. You see them, women possibly in Tim's and some other fast food places who are, they're over 65, but those people are on fixed incomes are going to probably need that income supplement. I'm calculating right now that if somebody applies for the CERB and is over 65 and receiving the supplement, could lose up to 155% of the supplement because there's so many other programs out there trying to claw it back. And those programs, the GIS itself will take 50%. Something called the GIS supplement will take another 25%. If a person's living in subsidized housing, yes, Toronto Community Housing Corporation has made the decision to take back 30%. They're going to raise rents on the CERB and take 30% of it. Think of what would happen if a private landlord tried to raise their rents by 30%. In any event, we need a decision quickly from the federal government to make sure that they don't take back all of that CERB through the Guaranteed Income Supplement Program. So we're watching that closely. So the final concept, and I'll close on this, is to think about purpose versus pedigree. A lot of what governments are doing right now, provincial governments and municipal governments, they're trying to look at something like the CERB and saying, well, what is this? Is it EI? Is it EI replacement? Is it income replacement? Is it earnings replacement? What kind of benefit is this? If it's a refundable tax credit, they'll leave it alone. But if it's an EI offshoot, or if it's an EI, or if it's a benefit that is earnings replacement, their general view is to take it back in as income and reduce their own program. So social assistance would reduce it, disability would reduce it. As we've already seen, the city of Toronto has made the decision to charge rent on the CERB for people who are in subsidized housing, and every cent that they take away from these folks in this pandemic is dollars that they are not getting, and that's going to affect Scarborough more than other places, and it also affects our local businesses because that's money that they don't have there to spend. So I am trying to tell governments to look at the purpose of this benefit. The purpose of the benefit is to help people stay safe, and people who are in congregate type, we've seen what's happened in our long-term care facilities, but people who are in homeless facilities, people who are in congregate areas like the homeless, and other people who are jammed into TCHC apartments, the purpose of this benefit is to help them stay safe, to help them buy food, and to help them stay indoors. To the extent that the money is clawed back, that is not happening, and that they should once again look at the purpose of the program as opposed to its pedigree. And what they have done too much of is look at the pedigree of the program. So with the introduction of those three concepts, isolation, deficit versus dividend, upfront versus back-end eligibility, and purpose versus pedigree of benefits, I'll close with that and be available for questions.
Okay, great, John. Has anybody got any questions? Just raise your hands and remember to unmute yourself, either with the holding the space bar down or with pushing unmute.
John, I have a question. So the devil in the details here really is how it's treated in the tax system in a lot of ways. And this is something that, I mean, the average person, even someone with some expertise in this area, is not what, I mean, where I'm going with this is the sticker shock isn't going to be realized until next April when people start doing their tax returns for the 2020 calendar year. And that's when, you know, the shit might hit the fan, as, you know, as it were. I mean, I guess what you're trying to do is to sort of intercept that so that this is sort of firewalls walled off so it's not captured in the tax system before that happens. But is there any way of getting sort of like the tax professional community? I mean, I know they're not, socially conscious by nature, but if the tax professional community could be engaged in this, that would probably add a lot more credibility to, I mean, the work that you've already done to get underneath the devil is in the details that you've uncovered so far. I'm rambling here, but what are your thoughts in terms of trying to get some advocacy at a broad level?
On the tax side of it, one of the very, very first announcements from Mr. Trudeau was that this, and from Mr. Morneau, is that this is a taxable benefit. When it's a taxable benefit, and for those of you who do your own taxes or know what a tax form is, it means that this is going to be income that's added before line 140, that is the first page of your tax return. And when you add it and it's not earnings, it comes out as something that's either going to be a T4A, which is other income, or T4E if it has an EI pedigree. We really don't know what line of the tax form it's going to be on, but rest assured, it's not going to be in T5s or the sort of income that then could be backed out of your total income for taxable purposes. So since it's there, two things happen. First of all, it's going to be taxable, and for people who have high enough income to pay tax, they're going to pay tax on it. But in addition to that, we have to think about all these other programs like the Guaranteed Income Supplement, like social assistance, like housing, that also have a habit and a tradition of looking at those forms of income that precede line 140 on a tax return, on the personal tax return. And they look at it, and housing says, gee, that looks like income to me. I'm going to charge rent geared to income rent on it. The social assistance system thinks, hey, that looks like other income that somebody's got. Why am I going to pay welfare when somebody's getting this income from somewhere else? And then we're going to have the old age security system that's going to look at it and say, hey, that looks like income to me. So I'm going to start reducing the amount of supplements that I pay out to seniors because of where it is on the tax form. And that's what I meant by the difference between pedigree and purpose, because the pedigree is that it's on before a line for the tax professional. They're going to see the CERB before a line 40, which means it goes into the calculation of total income and doesn't get backed out before line 236 in the way that social assistance or other social benefit income would otherwise occur. So for the tax professional, you're going to see that before line 40, and it's not going to be backed out. So it's not just the taxable benefit, but it's all those other programs that like to base their eligibility on what they see before line 40. So I think that's what we're looking for. And Larry, you also have a good point, is that somebody could end up getting all this benefit up front. They spend the $8,000, and then when they get their rent review in public housing, or when they start doing their taxes next year, or start doing their and of course their tax return figures into what they're going to get through the old age system, they're going to possibly get a very rude surprise. In other words, don't spend all this money in one place, because you might find that you're losing it on the back end.
Okay, great. Anybody else have any questions for John?
It's Avram. Quick thing, John. I've had a couple of clients mention to me where they're working, but their employer is applying for the 75% wage program. And from what I understand, that's going to be retroactive. Is that what you've heard as well?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, it's a sweet program, because you can get the money up front, and then you don't have to pay all of it back, regardless of what you do. But I do understand that it's going to be retrospective in that way. And I think what the thing they're trying to do, just as they did with the CERB, is they're trying to get it out the door fast and then reconcile it later. Now, for the business owner, for someone, a business owner usually, in most cases, is going to have the savvy of saying, okay, I'm getting money here. I'm going to have to pay it back. I'm going to pay part of it back at some point. So I got to take that into account. I think how that's different from individuals is, and especially low-income individuals, are not necessarily going to know that this money that all of a sudden I got $2,000 extra in the bank account, that they have to remain aware of not just how the government will take it back in taxes, but how other levels of government might take it out in either fees, rents, or clawbacks.
Okay, and I think Courtney had a question.
Yeah, we have based on what you have said and some other areas where folks have commented on the same thing, we seem to have a patchwork of benefits and a patchwork of clawbacks that seem to ensure that poverty remains in place. And there's really seems to be no real effort to kind of get us out of this position. The presentation we had last week from Arthur concluded with, you know, a kind of look to the future. And in there he said that, you know, folks may begin to look more at the philosophical framework of democratic socialism. In the midst of all of this, in the midst of a system of benefits and clawbacks that seem to guarantee that we pretty much stay in the same place, where do you see things like guarantee minimum? Where do you see things like municipal living wages?
Very interesting question, because I think what the, especially the CERB and some of the other benefits, and we might get a rental assistance benefit too, they're talking about that. What it brings up is all of the usual issues that we've seen over but it exacerbates them. In other words, all of a sudden you get a benefit that's paid out pretty free and easy. Anybody who applies for the CERB and makes a couple of attestations, wow, the money comes to them. And so this Laurie Montsebraten in the Toronto Star said, hey, this starts to look and taste and feel and smell like a guaranteed annual income. Is that what it is? I think the answer really to that is no, because it's temporary, because a guaranteed annual income of sorts would be permanent. But having said that, I'd also note that the Canadian Child Benefit in some ways provides a guaranteed minimum income to children, and our old age system through OAS, GIS, and CPP and the Gains program and to various tax credits provides what looks like and feels like a guaranteed annual income for seniors. So Canada is well known for taking good care of the bookends of its society in terms of its children and seniors, but it's not as well versed in terms of providing supports to people who are 18 to 65-year-olds. In other words, those who are working and at least in theory supposed to be paying for all of this. So it's again something I think as we start to come out of CERB, we will see whether some of these features that we have, like easy access to the money, are things some people have called a helicopter money, where it's actually a helicopter. It's something from Milton Friedman, who said a helicopter would go up in the sky and just start dropping money to people. So we'll see after this is over. I would point out to you that we had something called Mother's Allowance, which came into place in 1920, and it was largely because there was so many widows because of the First World War, but it was also in equal part in place because of the Spanish flu and how many women with young children were widowed. Well, that was supposed to be a temporary program, that once the children all turned 18 by the late 30s, that program wasn't going to be in place anymore. Well, fast forward 100 years and we still have a form of Mother's Allowance under social assistance and under our child benefits. So Canada's pretty good at putting programs in place that are temporary in nature, The guaranteed income supplement was another. And if you remember, income tax was supposed to be another program that was temporary to pay for the war back in 1917. So we'll really have to watch to see whether these temporary programs have a way of sticking around after their original purpose is not there anymore.
Okay, any other questions for John? Basil.
John, we talked about where the $2,000 goes on the income tax form and saving some of it to pay taxes or to make up for clawbacks on rental costs and so on. My major concern is those people who don't know how to apply for the $2,000. They say if you're not computer literate, you can phone. But if it's going to take 2 weeks to get through on the phone, I have a major concern for those people who really need that $2,000 every 4 weeks and don't know how to do it. And we don't have anybody who is helping them to apply for the $2,000.
Yes, at this time, I'd say one of the things that many of us can do, I've done it for about 4 people right now, because I have access to all the computer software, etc. And I just get them on the phone, and I've applied for 3 or 4 people. I think if we all did that for people that we know of, it could really help out, because there is a form. I think those of you who do people's taxes, you know that there is a form that someone can hand over an authorization for you to do it. So I think if every one of us took 1 or 2 people that we know of or will hear of through the grapevine who is in that situation, we really help out. But I don't think that's the real answer to your question. The real answer to your question is, how do we bridge the digital divide between people? I mean, if you go by a library in Scarborough, I can tell you that there's going to be people outside that library, outside a window, and you're wondering what they're doing there. Are they up to no good? Well, most of them are sitting there with their phones or their laptops getting the Wi-Fi that the library has left on, and there's a lot of them applying for the CERB through that. I would have loved to got a photo of that, because it's really such a sign of the time. But I think that, so there's a lot that we can do individually for people when we can volunteer, even from inside our own homes. And there's a lot, I think, that we can do to make sure that people get access to the online resources that they require. Not just now, but it's a cautionary tale for what happens when the tax clinics come back open, when the libraries come back open, and when the other things. When we shut these things down, it's not the well-off that suffer, it's the poor among us who do.
Okay, great. Basil, I'd like to ask you to thank John for his presentation, and I'm going to unmute everybody so we can applaud afterwards.
John, it's always an honor to have you with us. I have never met such an ardent advocate for Scarborough. You've always held up the light to Scarborough. You're such a passionate proponent of Scarborough. You tell us how great Scarborough is as far as being a safe, welcoming place to live. And for that, we can't thank you enough. John, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, John. And you can stick around. I know you're a busy guy, so you may have to go. But we're going to continue the meeting, and everybody, all of the guests are welcome to stay around.